Anyone who has ever needed to produce an extended piece of writing knows the struggle, whether it's a school or university assignment, a report you've been asked to prepare by your boss, or a response to an angry client's complaint. We have all been faced with that feeling of being overwhelmed by the task of writing. How do we start? How do we tame our tangled thoughts into a cogent piece of writing? And how do we keep going when it all just seems too hard? This presentation outlines one approach to tackling extended writing tasks that I've been using for many years. First with my secondary school students and now with my university students. I even use it myself if I have to produce a journal article or even a webinar or lecture. The thing I really like about this approach is that it works across all subject areas and all year levels, from junior school right through to tertiary. This approach to extended writing draws on the work of Betty Flowers, who argues that it helps to think of writing as involving 4 different people or roles and not just one: the madman, the architect, the carpenter, and the judge. Understanding that writing involves steps or stages and involves different skills and different ways of thinking at different points in the process has many benefits. First, it gives you a clear starting point. This is really helpful because getting started is often the first barrier. We've all wasted time choosing just the right font. Second, it provides concrete steps for each role so you know exactly what you should be doing at each stage and can do one thing at a time. Third, it provides a sense of accomplishment. As you complete each phase of the process, you get a sense of forward progress and can see that you're getting closer to the final goal. This helps with motivation and can also reduce that sense of being overwhelmed that we've all experienced. What it all adds up to is that this approach can help you get unstuck. Flowers says that what happens when you get stuck is that 2 competing energies are pushing against one another. One is the energy of the madman. The madman is full of ideas, writes crazily and maybe sloppily. The second is a critical energy, the judge. The judge looks at what the madman has written, and because the judge is educated and knows a bit about good writing, tells the madman that what has been produced so far is rubbish. So every time your madman writes something, the judge crushes the confidence and energy, even though the judge can't actually create anything, only critique it. The solution is to separate those competing energies into different roles. So let's look more closely. First, the madman. The key in this phase is to get your ideas down on paper, without worrying about how logical or grammatically correct your writing is. That is not the madman's job. Depending on the writer's age and the nature of the task, the madman phase can take a variety of forms. For a junior school student writing a recount, it might involve writing down every big life event they can think of and what they remember about it. For a secondary school student writing an essay, it might involve identifying each element or aspect of the task and then brainstorming ideas in relation to each aspect using a mind map, for example. This might also involve writing down questions that arise during brainstorming. After this initial phase of madness, where you have brain dumped everything you can think of onto paper or a blank screen, walk away. Flowers suggests for about a day. The next day, it's time for the architect. The architect is very unsentimental, and after reading through the madman's writing, decides what's worth keeping. This might only be 3 or 4 points. The architect then arranges these into a pattern. One way of approaching this is to come up with 3 or 4 key points and put these into complete sentences. Underneath those headings, supporting ideas can be included as dot points. Don't worry about sentence structure. That's not the architect's job. Just record the supporting ideas. These headings and dot points can then be used as an organisational framework for any research you need to do. Now, this is where I've added another aspect to Flower's original 4 roles: reading and research. Complex extended writing involves reading and research, but whose job is it? In my experience, whether reading and research is the job of the madman or the architect really depends on the nature of the writing task you are producing. If you don't know very much about the topic, then you might need to do some initial reading and research as part of the madman's role. On the other hand, if your architect is able to come up with an overarching framework based on the madman's writing, then you might make research the architect's job, using that framework as headings and keep research notes underneath those headings. Whether you give the job of reading and research to the madman or the architect, or maybe even split it between both, just make sure you keep track of your sources and of any direct quotes to make sure you are giving appropriate credit to others' work. Once the madman and the architect have finished their jobs, including any necessary reading and research, it's time for the carpenter. This is the stage we all tend to want to jump to straight away, which is why we often get stuck. The carpenter takes the architect's framework and supporting ideas and nails these together into a logical sequence, using complete sentences which should be clear, relevant to the paragraph, and connected to other sentences so that the ideas progress smoothly and logically. The trick in this stage is that you need to produce coherent writing without obsessing too much over mechanics like word choice or punctuation or which specific conjunction or cohesive tie you'll use. That's the judge's job, not the carpenter's. One strategy is to set a time limit for each paragraph or section. If you're struggling or bogged down, move on and come back later. Finally, the judge can inspect the written product. I'd suggest that, if you can, walk away from the document for a day or two to give yourself some distance so that you can be more critical. Flower sees the judge's job as about polishing things like punctuation, spelling, grammar, and tone. But I find it helpful to distinguish between 2 different kinds of polishing: editing and proofreading. When you're editing, you are still making reasonably substantial changes to the document. You'd ask yourself questions like, does this flow? Are all the key points adequately addressed? Is it the right length? And is there repetition or redundancy that I need to remove? While carefully, critically, and reflectively reading, the judge might decide that a topic sentence needs a more nuanced, cohesive tie to convey the author's intent, or might decide that this or that sentence doesn't contribute to the topic of that paragraph. In this case, the judge can send the writing back to the carpenter for more work. If the judge decides that a contention hasn't been adequately supported by evidence, it might even be sent back to the architect or the madman to find that evidence, and then to the carpenter to nail that evidence into the paragraph. Proofreading, on the other hand, is the sole domain of the judge. When proofreading, the judge doesn't make any substantive changes to the document, but only fixes spelling, punctuation, or syntax errors that might have sneaked through. So next time you're feeling stuck with a piece of writing, remember that you need to stop the madman, the architect, the carpenter, and the judge from fighting with one another for centre stage. Each role has its turn and its own unique contribution to make. So divide writing into each stage. Follow the process by making sure that each role only does the tasks associated with that role, and make sure you recognise the progress you're making as you move through each stage.